midnight screams.
I met a kid on my delivery route today. I was driving 45 miles per hour down a busy main road, busy as it can get in the sticks, at least, fast enough to hinder my eyesight. Gravel driveways veiled in overgrowth revealed themselves as quick as they vanished, way too thin for a truck built to haul furniture and refrigerators to traverse through. I found the address, albeit a little too late. I got honked at as I slammed the brakes. The driveway only had a few feet of leeway before I would have slammed into their shabby wooden barrier of a gate. An "I don't call 911" sign, rustier than the Titanic, was nailed to a tree. It portrayed a cartoon barrel that aimed right at me in the driver's seat. It's always good practice to observe someone's property before stepping foot on it, especially as a delivery driver. Houses out here can be weird. Most people don't choose to live in isolation. Their bank accounts do. I can't blame someone for wanting to buy a house for a quarter of the price you'd spend in the suburbs. But they're not the weird ones. It's the folks that choose to live out here, ones that crave a silent, secluded life. But it was a sign on the gate that threw me off guard. Keep gate closed at all times. Usually, this sign is accompanied by neighboring warnings of a dog's presence, or my delivery app notifying me of dogs on the property. Yeah, basically just big, scary dogs. But there was none of that. Just keep the gate closed. Be wary of the customer. I nabbed the cardboard box from a shelf in the van. A few pounds of metal clanged around inside. Standing in front of the gate, my van's engine idling behind me, I considered the sign once more. I could see the house from here. It wasn't entirely in shambles. The roof was intact, and so were its walls. A clutter of bikes, plastic children's structures, and cardboard littered the front yard in masses of dunes, a no-man's land of toys likely to remain untouched in the coming months. But the customer requested a garage delivery roughly a dozen yards away. I'd be in and out in no time. So I opened the gate, lifting its latch and applying a slight push as it creaked open, halting as it casted itself among the shrubbery. I took my first steps onto the property as I passed through the threshold between barreling traffic and a stranger's home. The garage grew closer with each step, but I couldn't get the gate out of my mind. I stopped, looked behind me. Still open, still the same as it was. Nothing entering and nothing leaving, except for me. I turned to face the garage again. Something moved rapidly in the corner of my vision. I think it was the front door. Had it just closed? I hadn't heard anything. I leaned over for a better view of the home's front porch. Nothing suspicious amongst the mountain of empty boxes. Snap out of it. You have a few hundred packages to deliver today. Hurry it up. I treaded across the gravel toward the garage. Where a car should be was instead used for storage. Shelves overflowed with piles of dust-coated junk so thick it was as if the garage connected to a dark void instead of a house. 3 steps in, place the package down. 3 steps out. Not much to it. Except I felt like a jungle explorer, ducking under a ripped pool noodle and frayed rope hanging from the top shelf instead of vines and snakes. Hell, there might have been a snake in there. I wouldn't have been able to tell, except, instead of slithering, I heard rapid footsteps crunching through the dead grass of the front yard. I pivoted away from the garage and faced toward my van. The last thing I needed was a crazed customer who forgot they ordered a package, mistaking me for a burglar. But that's not what I saw. My heart dropped. A little boy, thin and wearing dirt-coated rags that barely functioned as proper clothing, ran straight for the gate. I didn't want to think about what would happen if that kid bolted into the street, but the thoughts forced their way into my head anyways. "Hey!" I yelled at him with my adult voice. He stopped inches from the gate, turning to face me with an expression of aloofness and determination, as if I had just thrown a wrench in his plan. He cradled his iPad, shattered and falling apart, close to his chest. My heart raced. I considered the worst. What if he runs past the gate out into the street? What if I get fired for handling someone else's child to prevent them from running? Where the hell are his parents? But the child turned, dumbfounded at my van parked just inches away. I used the opportunity to walk by him and shut the gate, the package still in my hands. "Go back inside. I don't think your parents want you out here," I tell him as the gate locks. His eyes lock onto mine. His pupils dilated, his breaths rising and falling at the pace of a hummingbird's wings. A shrill cry bellows from the boy as if I had committed the ultimate betrayal. I panic again. Do I just go? I'm on the clock. But something feels off. This doesn't feel right. God, where the hell are his parents? I get in the van and stare at my work phone. A moment later, and I'm on a call with dispatch. "Dispatch!" A voice blares through gunk-stuffed phone speakers. "I'm out in the country a bit, a ways from the station, and I'm delivering to a house." I respond, trying my best to explain whatever the hell is going on. "Yes. And?" "Well, this kid ran out of the house as I was making the delivery. He looks in rough shape. I thought he was going to sprint right into traffic. I don't see his parents anywhere." My dispatcher takes a moment before responding. "You want to call the police?" "I don't know. This just feels off. You're in the boonies. Everything is off. It's getting darker out. I can tell he'd prefer it if I'd finish my route and return to the station without an incident report to file. But this was more important than some desk jockey's feelings or this multi-billion-dollar company. They could afford a few packages returning tonight. I glance up at the boy through my windshield. He's fiddling with the latch but can't quite figure it out. "All right. Can I at least check if his parents are home?" I ask. "Fine, but keep it off the record if everything's okay." "Good enough for me." I hang up the phone and hop out the van. The boy backs away from the gate, twitching giddily. "No, you're not leaving, buddy. Just checking in with your mom and dad," I tell him as I open the gate. I block the open space with my wingspan before closing it this time, but he doesn't attempt a grand escape. Instead, stiffly skips toward the front door as I follow close behind. I knocked a few times on its splintered white surface. No answer. The boy looks up at me. I get a real good look at his face. Specks of dirt coat his cheeks, very visible in contrast with his bright eyes and pale face. Mommy's stuck in the mask again. I knock once more, ignoring the ramblings of someone else's child. "Hello? Your kid's out here." Still no answer. But the young boy must have lost his patience, because he shoved me aside and opened the unlocked door. I was immediately hit with a waft of something I had never smelt before. Something so pungent, so tangible of a scent. It was like shit and God, like rotten fruit and spoiled chicken, had a gangbang and decided to have aftercare in a tub of fish guts. I don't even think that half describes how putrid this smell was. And this kid was living in it. I recoiled at the scented onslaught. That offensive and decaying smell filled my nostrils. I hadn't even had a proper look inside yet. I was too scared to venture further. But I looked up through the door, and there he was, skipping through like he was in a field of flowers. I had to fight it, block it out, see what's going on. This poor kid. God, the smell. I opened the door wider in a weak attempt to air out the building, tucking my shirt over my nose as I set foot on a mushy carpet. The walls were coated in a yellow wax that tangoed with clumps of black mold. Ash trays stacked like the leaning tower of pizza atop a coffee table. Takeout boxes and unwashed dishware blanketed a couch. Its color I can't describe, as it was hidden beneath the trash, serving as a home for flies and their maggots. The television, sitting upon stacked books and magazines, blared the local news. The only illumination in the house, since daylight couldn't penetrate the grime-covered windows. I was in a living room. It took a lot of focus to avoid stepping on trash as I followed the boy deeper into the house. He waltzed through the landmines of clutter as if it had been there his whole life. The air felt thicker on my face the deeper into the home I went. A flash of light from the room ahead. I watched the boy as he stood on his tiptoes under the hazy refrigerator light, which revealed the unkept disarray of the kitchen as it swept over piles of dirty dishes and cooked meals left to rot on countertops. His torso leaned into the fridge as he rummaged around. Plastic containers of lunch meat, now gray with age, clatter on the floor. He took a jar of pickles, wiping used silverware and greasy baking trays off the counter before setting it down and glancing in my direction with a finger in his ear. Mommy needs dinner. Something was so very wrong. Okay, I'll open it for you, but then I need to call someone. I stumbled over to the counter and tossed the package aside. It landed softly on a clump of plastic and paper glued together with who knows what. Grasping the large jar with both hands, I went to work on the lid while keeping an eye on the boy who glanced around agitated. Hopefully this would keep him still. An eerie moan from somewhere in the house. I stop, look around. The boy clenched his jaw. His chest heaved faster. He dove for the package, disappearing behind a vortex of scraps launched into the air. I wanted to react, but the kid set me up. I set the jar back on the counter, but he far surpassed the range of my grip before I could even think about reaching for him. As the newspapers and plastic wrappers settled, the boy turned a corner and ran down nearby steps like his life depended on it. I made the mistake of following him. The basement was near pitch black. How that kid managed to climb down those steps without falling baffles me, but I wasn't thinking that at the time. To be honest, I had only two things on my mind: get the child to safety and ignore that horrible smell. Those issues only worsened with each descending step. Maybe their sewage is backed up. How long has this boy lived here? I don't know if I can stomach this anymore. I need to get him out. What the hell could be down here? Again, that choked moaning, louder this time. And as I reached the final step, a light bulb flickered to life. The boy stood there, box in hand, dangling string connected to a ceiling bulb in the other, his little footprints embedded in a thin sheet of gunk from the stairs to the middle of the room. And past him, across the room, through the basement dust and murkiness which devoured what morsels of dim light there was to be offered, was a person. At least what I could make out as one from behind. A woman sat in a wooden chair, her head leaned back as if she were asleep. A clear mask, with a tube running from her mouth, lay across her face. A CPAP machine rested on the floor beside her. The source of those restless groans, which echoed throughout the home and were now amplified by these basement walls. The top of her scalp had lost most of its hair, leaving only clumps of strands that protruded from her shriveled gray skin. And there was something on her face, big and bulky, sleek like a device. The boy sat on the armrest of her chair and worked at tearing apart the box I had delivered as I took a closer look at the woman, circling her to get a better view of her face. It was a corpse. Had been for a long time. She was wearing a virtual reality headset. From her, a curled groan erupted as air was forced down her throat and involuntarily expelled from her lungs. Metal clanged in the boy's hands as the cardboard wilted on the floor. Nitrous oxide canisters. He went to work releasing their contents into the machine that filled his mother's lungs. The very thing I delivered to this house. This boy. I sprinted up those stairs as fast as I could, bolted through the kitchen with disregard for dishware that toppled over and sent spores dancing amongst the floor. Raced past the well-dressed anchorman on the TV, who was selfishly unaware of where his likeness was being broadcasted, and plummeted onto the front lawn. I was out of the house, but the smell lingered. It still does. The sun was setting. My phone rang. I reached into my pocket and sat up, staring back into the living room where the boy now stood, staring back. I held the phone to my ear. "You aren't kidnapped or murdered, right?" Dispatch asked. "No, I'm okay." My mind was clouded. I just needed to push through. Get on with the job. "Did you fix things up with that boy and his parents?" The TV's light flashed upon the boy. His jittery movements were halted. His breathing slowed. It was time to go. His mom came out and took him in. I said, "So you're good to return to your route?" They asked, stubbornly. "Yeah, I'm getting back in the van now." "Good. Keep delivering. See you back soon." The boy and I shared a moment of silence once more before I shut the front door and walked back to my van. Keep gate. Closed at all times. It's burned into my head. I didn't even consider calling the police until now. I don't even remember the address. I just wanted to get out of there. I run an Airbnb in the Appalachian woods, and there are rules you need to follow. I inherited my grandfather's cabin after he passed away. I would never sell it, because quite frankly, I don't want to be haunted by his angry ghost. I live in Pittsburgh, and I've never really been much of a great outdoors kind of person. I spent a few weekends of my childhood at my grandfather's cabin because my dad always said it's good to get out of a city and get a change of scenery. I always figured it was just an excuse for my dad to be able to grab a few beers and relive the days of his reckless youth with his buddies because he was always hungover when we came home. We always had a good time visiting Grandpa as kids. There's plenty to keep you occupied, but if I'm honest, the place always scared me a little. My granddad used to tell my brother and I these stories growing up, and I always figured they were just tall tales and ghost stories used to keep us from wandering at night. I know better now. Don't get me wrong, it's a cozy cabin and makes for an excellent weekend away. Grandpa took a lot of pride in making it as homey as possible, and I've done my best to uphold that. It wasn't perfect, by any means, and since his passing, there's been a few adjustments. There's no longer any mold in the bathroom, and the gutters have been cleaned for the first time in about a decade. The shower's decent, and we even installed one of those fancy wooden hot tubs out back, because I hear people like those. There's a fireplace in the living room and a few fluffy rugs. We removed the deer hides that used to cover the floors because my wife thought it might come off as a little too macabre for the more sensitive soul, and I guess she's right. There's even a fire pit outside for toasting marshmallows, making s'mores and what have you. I'll be honest, I didn't think we'd get any interest when we first put up on Airbnb but it's pretty remote. Pittsburgh is the nearest city, but it's about 4-hour drive, and then a bit of an off-road adventure into the woods. The place ain't exactly located on any maps, but the local ranger station does know about us. We only got access to the cell phone hotspot a few weeks ago, because we figured people would want to stay connected, even though that kind of defeats the point of a getaway. Now, this ain't no 5-star hotel. It's comfortable, but it's also practical. There's a sofa bed in the living room, and then 2 single beds in the bedroom. The kitchen is small, but practical and will have everything you need. Although the gas stove can be a little temperamental at times. Okay, I think those are the practical bits out of the way. Remember those stories my grandpa would tell us? The ones that I used to think weren't real? I'm afraid I have some bad news. They're real. I learned that the hard way when we began the refurbishment before turning into an Airbnb. I wish I was kidding, but I'm not, and I need you to listen very carefully. Your life depends on it. If by the end of this you still don't believe me, well, don't say I didn't warn you, and don't come asking me for a refund. Announce yourself when you arrive. This was something Grandpa always did that I used to think was a bit weird, but now it makes sense. Before you unlock the door, put your bags down and turn around so that you are facing the woods. Then, without screaming, but loud enough so that your voice carries, say these words. My name is your full name, and I'm staying here until the exact date you plan on checking out. I mean you no harm, and I ask that you leave me alone. Honestly, I can't guarantee that this works, but manners maketh man and whatnot. If you hear a baby, no, you didn't. This is Appalachia 101. There will be times when you are outside, maybe chilling in that nice hot tub, and you'll hear what sounds like a bobcat. You'll probably think, it's probably just a bobcat, but I need you to really listen to me here. It isn't a bobcat, nor is it a baby. Whatever you do, don't try to find the source of the sound. Just ignore it, and it times might, times ignore you. Always keep the porch light on. Just as you walk inside, there's a little light switch on the left side of the door. You want to flick it to turn on the front porch upon arrival. No, it doesn't matter if it's still broad daylight. The light always has to be left on. I once had a guest tell me they kept the light off to preserve energy. All through the night, they heard footsteps on the porch and knocking on the door. It wasn't until they turned the porch light back on that it stopped. Pull the curtains at night. This one is really just a bit of friendly advice, but I definitely wouldn't want to turn around in the middle of the night to a face staring at me. If you hear whistling, don't whistle back. When I was around 10 years old and was out here for a weekend, Grandpa was out sorting firewood and I was left to my own devices. I decided to go exploring, and as kids do, wandered off. At one point, I heard whistling that I thought sounded exactly like the way Grandpa whistles, and so I replied with the same whistling because it was a game we used to play. I found Grandpa chopping wood, and when I told him about the whistling, his face turned pale. He scolded me for doing something so reckless, and I was confused. I thought he'd been the one whistling. He picked me up, and we ran inside. He locked the doors and shut the windows. We heard the whistling outside the cabin as if someone was circling around it, and for weeks I heard it in my dreams. Whatever the old man says, he isn't Mr. Miller. We don't have many neighbors out here, but I always remembered Mr. Miller. His cabin is technically the one closest to Grandpa's. He used to have this sweet old Nova Scotia retriever called Dewey. He used to let us borrow. Dewey was the same age in dog years to Mr. Miller's human age, but with a puppyish soul. He was born with a bit of a limp, but that didn't stop him from chasing chipmunks to his heart's content. I'll never forget the time Mr. Miller knocked on the front door, barely able to hold it together, asking Grandpa if he'd seen Dewey and that he'd run off chasing something in the woods, but never came back. Grandpa and Mr. Miller searched for Dewey for 3 days without a trace. On the 4th day, Mr. Miller said he found Dewey's body ripped apart at the back of his cabin, as if something had done that to him. 2 days later, Grandpa went to check on Mr. Miller and found him in his rocking chair, shotgun in one hand, a hole through his head. So when you open the door to an old man who looks and sounds like Mr. Miller, with a dog that looks just like Dewey, asking if he can just have a glass of water or use the bathroom before he's on his merry way, I am telling you, it ain't Mr. Miller, and it sure as hell ain't Dewey. If the radio starts playing blues music, hide. There's an old-fashioned radio in the kitchen. It has access to a couple of stations nearby. We usually think it's a good idea to listen to for the sake of an accurate weather forecast, because it gets unpredictable out here. If the radio starts playing music, especially that one really old song, Me and the Devil Was Walking Side by Side, by what's his name? Robert Johnson, yeah, that one. If you hear that song coming out the radio, you need to hide as if your whole entire life depends on it, because it does. And don't even try to look even if somebody's walking around the cabin. I've never gotten a look at him myself, but according to the wife of one of our guests, her husband still has nightmares. Ignore the woman crying by the stream. Don't stop. Don't ask her if she's okay. Don't offer to help. Don't look her in the eyes. Don't talk to her. Just walk on by. She'll be gone by the time you are on your way back to the cabin. I don't know exactly what she is, but my dad says it might be a remnant of some kind of Swedish forest nymph. I read up about it some time ago, but apparently, according to legend, they seduce men into sleeping with them. There weren't a huge number of Scandinavian settlers in Appalachia, but some of them found their way here. They worked with logging and lumber and probably brought some of their stories with them from Scandinavia. Leave a tiny shot of whiskey on the bottom step every night. We keep a bottle of Gleglassaw single malt in the liquor cabinet. That's the really good stuff, bought directly from a distillery in Scotland. It is specifically for being left out. If you forget, or if you decide not to, don't come crying to me, Argentina, when you find out that all your socks have been cut into a million pieces and there's mice shit in your suitcases. It gets angry. I warned you. When you leave, be sure to announce your departure. Just like when you check in, this one is more for your own safety. Lock the door. Put away the key. Turn around facing the woods and say, "Thank you for having me. Please stay here and don't follow me back." 9/10 times. It works. Right. I think that's it. Well, at least the most important ones. That'll probably keep you alive throughout your stay. I have a ton of stories growing up here, but I need to get some shut-eye. Let me know if you want to hear them. Ah, shit. I forgot to warn you about the cult. Oh well, they're mostly harmless. This happened 6 years ago. Let me preface this by saying that I live in a fairly small town. It's perfectly adequate to live here, and there hasn't been much in the way of horrific crimes. That changed when I saw the man in the parka. I was bored sitting inside from the cold. It wasn't even the pretty kind of cold, where snow covered the ground and made everything look nice. This was a damp, wet cold that just makes bones ache. I was laid off, and while searching for a new job online, I decided to put down my laptop and look outside. It was overcast, dark, and the street was wet. All the neighboring houses have their Christmas stuff up early for the holidays. From my living room window, I saw someone walk down the street. Average build, 5'8", and he wore a distinctive olive green parka with light gray sweatpants. His hood was up, but I could see his face. It was an old man with a scruffy beard and an unwieldy mustache. As he passed by the house, he turned to me and waved. I forgot my shades were open. I was embarrassed and felt really awkward about the whole thing. So I waved back with a fake smile. He smiled back and went along his day. I checked my Facebook and saw that one of my friends had posted that her grandfather had been killed and asked everyone for prayers during their difficult time. I scrolled down and found out the local funeral home put up an obituary. The picture I saw posted was the man in the parka. I was, understandably, freaked out. He just walked past my house and waved at me. I shrugged it off as a look-alike, and maybe even a small part of my brain thought I saw a ghost heading to his heavenly home. It was a nice thought. I saw the same olive-colored parka again the next night. This time, my blinds were closed, but I peeped through the slits to get a look at the person. I expected to see the old man's face again, but this time it was a woman. She looked to be in her 30s, with fair skin and a skunk stripe running to the side of her hair. She was pretty, a face you don't forget. I saw that same face in another obituary online. Her name was Heather, and she was found dead in an alley downtown. Disemboweled, the suspect was still at large. The next night, I waited for it to pass by again. This time, it wore the face of a child. Same body shape, height, and size. But with a little boy's face stuck underneath the hoodie. It tripped on a piece of uneven sidewalk and tumbled face first. It caught itself, but something plopped out onto the pavement. It was the face, crumpled up like a slimy piece of deli-sliced ham. It scrambled, searching for it with panicked winter gloves until it found it and gripped it. The thing rose to its feet, draping the flesh over, whatever was under there. I called 911 to report what I saw. It matched the disappearance of a boy named Will. They came, filed a report, and looked for anyone matching this description. They came up empty-handed, but found Will in a creek bed. His neck was twisted the whole way around. They issued a public notice warning people to beware of a man wearing an olive-colored parka. It was, unfortunately, all they could work from. Weeks passed, and nothing turned up. And for a while, things started feeling normal again. My friend Julia was supposed to stop by and drop off a book she wanted me to read. We dated for a time, but it never materialized into a full relationship. We remained close friends. We even had our own little book club. One day, I told her we'd make a trade and swap books from our own personal collections. She wanted me to read Vineland, and I wanted her to read I Am Legend. So, I waited for her and heard the strong winds creak the wood in my house. I was beginning to feel myself fighting sleep when I heard a knock at the door. I looked at my phone's clock. She was 30 minutes late. I looked through the peephole and found Julia staring at me, smiling. I made it! It's crazy out there! I bet. Give me a second, I gotta grab the book from my room. Sure, take your time. I'm just freezing my ass off out here. I chuckled at her snarky comment. But as I grabbed the book from my room, my phone rumbled. It was a text from my mom. Can we talk? There were two modes of thought that overtook my mind. Either I've pissed my mom off somehow, or something bad happened. I texted back, yes. My phone began to ring, and I answered. I was walking back to the door. I said, hello? Honey, are you sitting down? She said. That made my blood chill. I stiffened. What's wrong? It's Julia. Honey, she's... Mom, it's fine. Honey, she's gone. Police found her in a dumpster this afternoon. I'm so sorry, baby. I looked through the peephole and looked at Julia's clothing. Gray sweatpants, an olive green parka, and in her hands was a copy of Vineland with flecks of blood on the cover. She spoke from outside. "Everything okay? It's freezing out here." I listened to my mom sniffling and her shaky voice trying to explain the situation. Said an employee at the pawn shop downtown was breaking down cardboard boxes when they saw blood coming out of the dumpster. "I'm so sorry, honey." I was silent, transfixed on the warped fish-eyed perspective of Julia's face. She seemed completely normal. She looked around and fidgeted with the book in her hands. It was completely ordinary. I whispered into the phone, "Hey, Mom, I want you to call the police. I think he's here." The person in the parka. The killer. Her tone got more serious. "Lock the door, hide, and protect yourself. I love you." I ran to the kitchen and grabbed a meat cleaver. I returned to the door and locked the chain latch. Then I heard from outside, "What's the holdup?" I froze. It spoke again. "Come on, let me in. It's cold." I talked back to it, asking, "Hey, Julia?" "Yeah? I think I lost my book, sorry." "It's okay. You can still borrow mine. Now open up." The door handle jiggled. "Julia, I hate to be rude, but yeah, you're being fucking rude. I'm cold, and I'm holding the book in my hands. Why not just crack the door open and take the fucking thing? You're being mean, Jules. You've never opened this fucking door." The door pounded. Thud, thud, thud. I clutched the cleaver in my hand as she assaulted the door. I looked through the peephole and saw only blackness. It was covering the hole. I thought about running, but I stood my ground, holding the cleaver with a white-knuckle grip. I screamed, "Get the fuck out of here!" I kept waiting for it to kick down the door, deadbolt and chain latch snapping away, but for some reason, it just stopped. I waited and waited, but the home invasion never came. I heard footsteps walk away from the door and down my steps. I needed to see if it was gone. I checked the peephole and found nothing at the door. I rushed to my living room window and peeked through the blinds, hoping to get a glimpse of whatever this thing was, instead of seeing the thing with the parka down the street, or just not there entirely. It was pressed against the window. That's when I realized that this thing wasn't covering the peephole. The darkness that encapsulated the glass hole was its face. It was a void of blackness, infinite, endless, and unnatural. I screamed, and then it bolted into the night. Minutes later, I heard the sirens. I didn't open the door until I saw the flashing lights entering my driveway. I opened the door to greet the officers when I slipped on something beneath my feet, something greasy and rubbery. It was Julia's face. It left it behind alongside her book. I think my husband's sleep-talking is ruining our lives. So, I had originally typed and posted this story to another subreddit, but figured I could get some actual advice here. This is the closest to the original story, but with some changes for this subreddit's rules. Any and all advice is appreciated. November 13th, 2025. So I am writing this during my lunch break at work and can't fit everything together at once, but I will come back to update this post whenever I can, and know that my husband doesn't think I'm writing this, hence why I'm at work. For some background, we married back in January, after dating for under 2 years and living together for 1, and since marriage we moved into a new apartment and adopted 2 cats, Hazel and Greta. They were 7 and 8 years old when we adopted them, and they are very independent cats who maybe join us in bed for 30 minutes to get some attention, and then they disappear and do whatever they do in the night. Back in the beginning of August, for about a week, Hazel started coming to bed with me. I have to get up at 4 inches the morning, so I am always the first one to go to bed, and my husband will stay up for a little bit playing on his computer before coming to bed. I thought it was strange, but I just assumed the cats were finally warming up to us and wanting to cuddle in bed. She sat on the pillows above head. On this night, my husband came to bed about an hour later. I couldn't sleep very well as I have on and off periods of insomnia, and the Benadryl hasn't kicked in yet. After a little bit of tossing and turning, I noticed my husband staring past me, looking straight at the wall with his eyes half opened, whites only showing, and whispering very quickly. I couldn't make out what he was saying. I just stared at him, completely stunned. He has talked in his sleep before, but it was always very brief, and he said actual sentences. After a minute of this weird whispering, he ended it with a shh like you do when you try to get someone quiet. His eyes closed all the way. I stood up in bed and stared at him, in a complete shock. "Are you fucking with me?" He put his hand over my face, saying shh again, sliding his fingers down my face. He turned over in bed and snored. I was freaked out. My cat was freaked out, and I woke him up. "What the fuck was that?" I asked him. "What was what?" He said, half awake. "You're sleep-talking." He shrugged and went back to sleep. Hazel came down off the pillows and slept next to me for night, but I didn't sleep for hours. My alarm went off at 4 inches the morning, and I got ready for work. I was completely dead from the lack of sleep and ended up being a few minutes late to work. The factory I worked at made fishing line, and the machine I was at had been locked out by the night mechanic. My lead had already taken the day off, so I had to make my way down to the maintenance department and ask for one of the day mechanics to unlock it, so I can finish my work order assigned to this machine. I was power walking and not really paying attention when I went around the corner and my foot caught a piece of metal that was sticking out from a shelf. I tried correcting myself to avoid falling, but it rolled on the shelf, seemingly sticking to my ankle. Because it was still clinging to my ankle, I fell awkwardly and basically dove into the concrete ground. The maintenance's parts lady happened to see me fall and came right over. My hand was shaking uncontrollably, in a pain I've never felt before. Their supervisor ended up taking me to the hospital, where they painfully found out I had broken my arm. My lunch break is almost over, but I swear when I can sit down and write again, it will make sense why I believe it has something to do with my husband's sleep-talking, as there are more instances like this happening. Hopefully I can get back to this tonight. November 14th, 2025. I apologize if the first part sounds really choppy. I am not a writer and haven't written anything since high school, and I only had 20-ish minutes to get it all out. Breaking my arm at work was a trippy thing to go through. I had never broken a bone in my body, and I had never been so creeped out by my husband. He did take really good care of me, though. I didn't have to lift a finger to do anything while at home. He cuddled me very gently, drove me to all my appointments. He made me feel as though we are an old married couple. The way we talk to each other and all the boring old couple stuff we do. The way our bones are constantly popping and cracking when we get up and stretch. The way his eyes are the same you see on a very old man who has seen the life flash before his eyes while on his deathbed. I started to joke about his sleep-talking was what broke my arm. It seemed so silly to connect the two incidents after a few weeks. September had rolled around, his birthday passed, and we were planning our anniversary for October. His grandfather had passed away back in July, and my husband was feeling like himself again. It was a Friday, so we had a few drinks and were enjoying the evening. It was pretty late by the time we got into bed. He fell asleep instantly, but I had to go to the bathroom first. Hazel had taken her place on my pillows, and Greta at the foot of the bed on my side. I had to stumble gently on the bed to avoid squishing the girls. I found it odd my husband was pretty rigid in bed. Sleeping on his back was his normal pose, but it seemed like he was really uncomfortable. His arms and legs seemed far too stretched. I tried to shake him awake, but he didn't wake. He made this weird groaning sound, or maybe it was a wheeze. I don't remember. I just remember thinking it was weird as hell. He snapped out of it, and we cuddled for the night. November 15th, 2025. It's been a few hours since the last update, but my husband was summoned to his computer by one of his buddies. I don't think he's ever played on his computer this early in the morning on a weekend. But from where I left off last time, his cousin passed away that Saturday afternoon. He was in a car accident. The news hit my husband like a truck. He had barely recovered emotionally from his grandfather's passing, and now the closest thing he had as a brother from his early childhood was now gone. It felt like my husband was gone for about a week. It's why I feel conflicted about posting these things happening, and especially why I don't want my husband to know I'm writing this. It just feels wrong to connect these horrible events to something as seemingly benign as sleep-talking. I feel bad because it's like I'm almost blaming him for these things happening when he has no control or memory of even doing it. I've gotten to the point where I'm considering getting holy water to keep on my side on the bed for when he does start sleep-talking. I've also been trying to pinpoint when he did sleep-talk, normally to when his sleep-talk happened the night before an event would happen. I consider the earliest possibility being back in March when my mother was diagnosed with breast cancer, but that feels like a stretch and a really shitty thing to pin on my husband. Pinning all these things on my husband feels like a really, really shitty thing to do, and I pray he never finds out I've written any of this. It's all a little too coincidental for it not to be connected. I think the most likely when his normal sleep-talking stopped was after the drive home from his grandfather's funeral. We live in western Colorado, and his extended family lives in southern Arizona. He dreaded the drive to and from there, figuring out hotels, dealing with Phoenix traffic. The drive there wasn't terrible, it was just a long and hot 9-hour drive. Me and my husband have been married for about 6 months on paper, but never announced it to anyone. We haven't had a proposal either, so as far as anyone knows, we're just dating still. We did this on a whim, on a random day in January, but the title's office was closed due to MLK Jr. Day, so we got married that Friday after work and celebrated at a restaurant that was close by. My parents wouldn't have cared because they absolutely adore this man, and after a year and a couple of months of living together, they said they already see us as a married couple. His parents would have made our lives hell if they found out we were already married. They would continually downplay my importance to my man since we started dating. When he had moved into my apartment after about 8 months of dating, they tried to stop him, despite him being a 25-year-old man. They didn't want to meet my parents, as they remarked to my husband, "Do we have to meet the parents of every girl you date?" I was his first girlfriend. We attended the funeral at different times, since they don't know we're married, and I have never met any of his extended family, so it felt disrespectful to show up at the family's open casket time slot. I waited at the hotel until the funeral was open to the public and met with my husband there. I got strange looks as I was a complete stranger to all of them except my husband and in-laws. His parents stared at me with disdain, as if they wanted to ask why I even showed up. I ignored them as they ignored me and focused on comforting my husband and sister-in-law. We started the drive home in the morning with the intention of getting home by 8 the latest. That did not happen. The drive was fine until we had to pass through Phoenix. Traffic there is already hell, but with all the construction they were doing, just made it worse. We were just happy he had a newer car with air conditioning that could keep up with the hellish Arizona heat. The speed limit was reduced to 40 inches, most areas, and some areas it was down to 25. It set us back by several hours that by the time we started driving through the reservation, the sun was already setting, and he was getting uneasy. Since he grew up in Arizona and with his family being mostly native, he was superstitious about driving through reservations during the night. He also hated night driving in general since he is prone to sleeping behind the wheel, which has caused 2 accidents, which happened before I had met him. He made it clear he refuses to do night driving when we first started dating and planning trips. I'm not that superstitious. I don't really believe, but I also don't not believe either. I'm more of a don't fear it but respect it kind of mentality towards that kind of stuff. I was talking to coworkers about the drive to Arizona a week before the drive, and all of them had their own stories about being in Arizona. Ed, one of the mechanics at my work who is from there, had his own story about why he would never drive through the reservation at night. Ed was driving during the night to get to Denver in the morning and sleep away his day off. He said he saw a hitchhiker along the road. He said, "Fuck that," and continued driving. 2 hours later, he saw the same hitchhiker and hauled ass all the way home. I think my husband fell asleep behind the wheel after it got dark. I have never seen anyone fall asleep while driving, so it freaked me out. He was staring at the road as if in a complete daze. I was trying to keep him talking, to keep him alert and not fall asleep, but he stopped talking back to me, but was doing his usual, nonsensible sleep talking. I waved my hands in front of his eyes, and he didn't react. He was driving normally, going around the winding road as if he could see just fine. I wasn't sure how to wake him up. I didn't know if that would cause him to jerk and crash the car. I waited until the speed limit dropped to 30 before gently squeezing his arm. I told him to slow down and stop. I carefully shaked his leg. He didn't wake up, but he did slow down to about 20 on a straight stretch of road. I grabbed the wheel to keep it straight and yelled his name, shaking his leg much less carefully. He slammed the brakes and was panicking. He started crying, told me he felt guilty for sleeping, especially when I was in the car with him. I told him he was fine, I was safe, and nothing bad happened. I told him we could switch and I would drive the rest of the way home. He only asked me if we were still in the reservation. My husband refused to step out of the car. He insisted on driving until we reached Utah. I tried to reassure him he was stressed out about the funeral and the driving, and he just needed to rest. He drove on before I could even finish my sentence. The whole drive home from then, he was constantly looking out his driver window, and then to my passenger window. The last hour of driving, he would stare intently at the rearview mirror, despite no one else being on the road until we got back into town. November 16th, 2025. I'm in bed with another sleepless insomniac night. My husband came to bed with me as he's had a long day and wanted to rest in bed. Hazel was on her perch above my head, and Greta laid in between me and my husband in this little pocket made between our legs, and the blanket was fluffed up a bit. He fell asleep in about 10 minutes. Something I've long been jealous of him for. He started snoring, but then just stopped suddenly. He rolled over, with what I was assuming to get comfortable. Greta wasn't too happy to be moved, and she moved over onto my legs, glaring at my husband. My husband let out this weird exhale, bordering on a wheeze. I shook him gently to wake him up, as I didn't want to know what would come out of his mouth. He grabbed my hand and got on top of me. His eyes were the gross half-open whites only visible. The terrible wheeze returned, crescendoing into an impossibly high-pitched sound. Hazel hissed at him, and the sound stopped. He pushed the cat off the bed and laid down next to me. The snoring resumed. I took the cats, grabbed some pillows and blankets, and got in my car, making sure all the doors are locked. I don't know what to do. I don't know where to go. All I know is something terrible is going to happen.